Hi, everybody. Most of you should have a book. I went off and dropped off a bunch of books today. So, you should have a book for this assignment. If I missed you, please let me know. Send me a message on Schoology so I can come bring you a book. Um, this will be on page 5 or 6 of your textbook, and it is the historical perspectives. The focus period is 1750 to 1800. I'm just going to read through it and show you guys if you don't have a book or you just want to listen and follow along. So, again, the historical perspectives part. A new nation. Voices of the period. Courage then, my countrymen. Our contest is not only whether we ourselves shall be free, but whether there shall be left to mankind an asylum on earth for civil and religious liberty. And that was Samuel Adams, advocate for colonial rights and signer of the Declaration of Independence. The enemy have now landed on Long Island, and the hour is fast approaching on which the honor and success of this army and the safety of our bleeding country depend. Remember, officers and soldiers, that you are free men, fighting for the blessings of liberty, that slavery will be your portion and that of your posterity if you do not acquit yourselves like men, as George Washington, then the commander-in-chief of the Continental Army. And last one, accordingly he signed the manumission that day, so that before night I, who had been a slave in the morning, trembling at the will of another, became my own master, and completely free. I thought this was the happiest day I had ever experienced. So this is Olaudah Equiano. He's an abolitionist and formerly enslaved African, and we're going to read a little bit more about his story. I've read the whole book, but you're going to read a portion of it, and it's really good, and his story is amazing. Okay. So here is the history of the period 1750 to 1800. Founded on freedom. The quest for freedom drove the establishment of the colonies. The Pilgrims and Puritans settled Massachusetts so that they could practice their religion freely. The Quakers, who had settled in Pennsylvania, Quakers are on the Quaker Oats box, right? And the Catholics who settled in Maryland also brought their religious convictions with them as they fled from England's restrictions. An American society. By the mid-18th century, the 13 desperate colonies had created a new society. Each colony was fiercely independent, but together they viewed themselves as different from societies across the Atlantic. American society generally valued equality and opportunity. It was much more homogeneous than what was the commonplace in Europe, without either nobility or a class of paupers who had no chance of bettering their lives. Enslaved African Americans were the notable exception. Indentured servants also had limits on their freedom. Furthermore, most of the colonial governments had two house legislatures elected by voters. The colonial governments may not have been fully democratic by modern standards, but colonists had and expected far more rights and freedoms than their counterparts that England did. Tightening controls. By the mid-1700s, most Americans took pride in being in charge of their colonial governments, so the demands that Great Britain began to make after winning the French and Indian War, known in Britain as the 7 Years' War, led inevitably to trouble. Colonists who were eager to move west were stymied by the Proclamation of 1763, which forbade settlement beyond the Appalachian Mountains. Furthermore, the taxes that Britain imposed to pay the cost of securing victory grew more and more onerous to the colonists. Quickly, no taxation without representation became a colonial rallying cry. In response, England tightened its grip. In 1774, Parliament cracked down on American freedoms even more, with laws that colonists called the Intolerable Acts. Then, in April 1775, the conflict turned from words and laws to bullets and deaths when the first shots were fired at Lexington and Concord in Massachusetts, the Hotbed Rebellion. Oops. Okay, so this is going to be on your PowerPoint, but how is each of the causes resolved as a result of the American Revolution? Which effect do you think may have been most on the minds of the Americans when they rebelled? Which may have been least? Okay, so here are the causes and effects. You'll look at that on your PowerPoint. Okay. Declaring independence. 6 months before Patriots and Redcoats clashed in Massachusetts, colonial delegates had gathered to consider their complaints at the First Continental Congress. A few weeks after the events at Lexington and Concord, the Second Continental Congress convened in Philadelphia. By June, the colonies were on the road to a real break from Britain. When the delegates officially declared the colonies' independence, they made freedom a central factor in their rationale. It is self-evident, they stated, that all people have unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. In concluding, they pronounced the colonies to be free and independent states. However, when they made the Declaration of Independence, they only counted white people as the people who deserve rights and the life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. That's Miss Brown's side note. Okay. Breaking the bonds. The new United States battled for independence for the next 7 years. The British had a clear goal: to keep the rebellious colonies within the British Empire. The Americans were more divided, however. Although probably no more than 20% of the American people were loyal to Great Britain, many others were uncertain about the radical venture of independence. Undeterred, the Patriots fought on. The colonies had a population of about 2.5 million and no standing military forces. By contrast, Great Britain boasted a population of about 7.5 million, as well as the world's most powerful army and navy. However, the colonists were fighting on home territory, whereas British were 3,000 miles away from home and lacked easy access to supplies. Then, in 1778, France entered the war on the side of the Americans. It was French aid that enabled the Americans to win the divisive battle at Yorktown. Tradition says that at British surrender, their band played "The World Turned Upside Down," a fitting tune for what had happened. The new nation that had demanded and won its independence would be unique in the world of its day, a self-governing democracy. In 1783, the Treaty of Paris officially brought the American Revolution to an end. Defining freedoms. Having fought for freedom, the new nation had to structure a government that would preserve it. The Articles of Confederation, approved in 1777 and formally ratified in 1781, confirmed the union of the 13 states as one nation. However, the agreement largely left each state free to function on its own, an arrangement that created an often dysfunctional union. Correcting the problems led to a complete recreation of the governmental structure and triggered the writing of the Constitution of the United States. Not satisfied with the guarantees of freedom embedded in the Constitution, however, many leaders urged the creation of what became the Bill of Rights. These first 10 amendments to the Constitution focused on guarantees of individual liberties, including freedom of speech, freedom of the press, and the right to legal counsel and trial by jury. These rights did not extend to all Americans, however. For all the focus on freedom and individual rights in founding the United States, enslaved African Americans, about 20% of the population, were left out of this discussion. In addition, even though property requirements were abolished for male voters in the new nation, 125 years would pass before suffrage was extended to American women, right? Because women couldn't own property, so they couldn't vote. A motivating force. Freedom had been a defining goal throughout American history. The literature in this unit explores how freedom has shaped the United States and how authors of both the past and present have applied visions of freedom to an ever-changing world. So here is the timeline for the period we're studying in Unit 1. Okay, so 1750 to 1800, a 50-year period. Okay, so 1754, the Albany Congress discusses Benjamin Franklin's plan of union for the colonies. 1755, England, Samuel Johnson's Dictionary of the English Language is published. In 1765, we have the British Parliament taxes the colonies with the Stamp Act. Okay, 1768, British troops occupy rebellious Boston. 1770, colonists and British soldiers clash at the Boston Massacre. In 1773, Parliament's Tea Act prompts the Boston Tea Party, which we watched that video on. 1774, colonial representatives meet for the First Continental Congress. 1775, the American Revolution begins. In 1776, the Second Continental Congress adopts the Declaration of Independence. In 1777, the 13 original states adopt the Articles of Confederation. In 1781, American forces defeat British at Yorktown. The Treaty of Paris ends the American Revolution in 1783. In 87, the delegates meet in Philadelphia to create a new constitution. And then the United States Constitution is ratified in 88. George Washington is elected the first president of the United States in 1789. Also that year, in France, the French Revolution begins. In 1791, the Bill of Rights are added to the Constitution. In 1796, John Adams is elected the second U.S. president. And in 1800, Thomas Jefferson is elected the third U.S. president. Okay, so that is this historical context section. So since you understand this, you're going to be able to understand the documents and the other things we're going to talk about and read through this first unit. You should know some of this from history class. So this should be a review, but if you need to go back and check it out sometimes, it's there for you in your textbook and on this video. Okay?